Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Miriam Taslip-Abbasi. I'm the Brownfield Development Manager for the Department of Toxic Substances Control. And I want to welcome everyone who made the time to join us today to be part of a pioneering group of individuals as we're launching the new Equitable Community Revitalization Grant. We have a lot of content to present to you today, and we're very excited to have you with us. On behalf of myself and my Dtsc team, I do want to wish you a warm welcome. And I'm going to get the show on the road by introducing you to Jean Hammerman, who is the Executive Director for the Center for Creative Land Recycling. Jean?
Thank you, Miriam. And we're so pleased to see so many of you today who are joining us to learn more about DTSC's Equitable Community Revitalization, or ECRG, grant program. I'll just take a moment to introduce you to the Center for Creative Land Recycling, or CCLR, and then share information about our role in the ECRG program. CCLR was formed 23 years ago by the Trust for Public Land with the goal of preserving open spaces by rebuilding in existing places. We're the only national not-for-profit solely dedicated to land reuse, and our mission has really remained pretty consistent over 2 decades to promote the sustainable, equitable, and responsible reuse of underutilized and environmentally impacted properties. To do this, we educate, advocate, assist, and convene stakeholders to revitalize communities through land recycling, and we've been a proud EPA provider for numerous states, including California. As we know, for those of you who are in this space, brownfields are like snowflakes. There are no two that look alike, and different resources are needed at different times. And we are here to meet you where you are at and to help you get to the next milestone in your revitalization roadmap. We support you by providing one-on-one technical assistance. We do educational webinars, workshops, and conferences. We have a new website at cclr.org. We have online resources and materials there for your view, and we help with EPA grant review. We hope many of you have already attended our California Land Recycling Conference, which is the premier statewide land recycling conference, and we are hoping to do an in-person event in May 2022. And we're really thrilled to be working with DTSC on this newly launched ECRG program. It's really an unprecedented investment in funding for inventory, investigations, and cleanup for the buildup of brownfield properties in California's most vulnerable communities. In our new BTAP role, we will work with entities through webinars, including the Flux application and qualifying criteria and application process and scoring. We'll do this through one-on-one calls and webinars and meetings to support applicants. We'll support you with reuse planning and other technical assistance as necessary, make referrals to other grant, loan, and technical assistance programs, provide Spanish support, community outreach assistance, and resource guides and program updates. We are recording this webinar, which we'll make available along with other resources. We'll push those out to you, and we'll also post them on our websites. Please note or find in the chat our contact information at ecrg@cclr.org and our phone number, and a link to sign up Genius slots, which will allow you one-on-one time with one of our revitalization specialists. If we need to set up more slots, we will do so as needed. There's other resources in the chat as well, California resources for layered funding and a graphic flow chart, so you can see how the ECRG program will unroll over the next couple of months. I'm really proud to introduce you to our talented team. They're all on the call with us now and interested to hear your questions, so they'll be better able to serve you. Many of you already know CCLR's Ignacio Derrit, who is the lead program consultant, and joining him are Sebastian Harrison, David Harness, and Janet Nato, who will be our revitalization specialists, who each bring specialized expertise to assist you during this process. Tony Torres will be assisting us with outreach and communications, and especially to our Spanish language support as needed. And Devin Rainwater will field and assign your questions and set up meetings and is here to provide support. So I'm going to turn it over to Ignacio at this time to take you through the application guidelines.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for attending. And as both Miriam and Jean said, this is unprecedented. In no time during the history of California have we seen this kind of money for brownfields revitalization. And even the first launch of about 70 million is competitive with what EPA does for the entire country. So think about it. Annually, California communities apply for about $10 million in EPA money. But this year, we have about 70 plus. So it all depends on you, and we have eligible entities. Local governments are eligible, tribes, nonprofits, and these are for impaired, underutilized properties, which everyone here wants to return into beneficial use. So we're not talking about land that is just contaminated or land that people just want to clean up. We want projects on properties for beneficial use. So I'll go through a few slides now of really teasing out what that all means. So who should all apply? Well, or why should you apply? Well, it's a very streamlined application process. Many of you here on the call have probably looked into the EPA grants. This is far simpler, and it is a lot of check boxes. And if you have information ready, if your community is ready for these projects, then it will be very easy for you to apply. The grants are up to $7 million. $7 million. You don't see that kind of money. It does not require site ownership to participate, although you do need site access. It focuses in high environmental justice areas. And there's free technical assistance. So if you get stuck, that whole team, all those pictures you saw, those are people plus more will be around to help you. So this is a very, I would say, accommodating program. We don't want anyone to fail. So you have to apply. And so who are eligible? What entities are eligible to apply? Well, local governments. And pretty much if you're authorized by the state as a district, a council of government, a joint powers, you would be eligible. Tribes and nonprofits. Now you have to be a 501c3, but if you don't fit within these entities, you can still participate as a partner to one of the eligible entities. Funding is available to support community-wide assessments, $80,000 to $300,000 for community-wide assessments, and I'll go into detail on what these mean. We have site-specific environmental investigations and environmental cleanups. Again, you must own or have access to the sites where the work will be performed, and it's a 2-year time frame. Now, you might think that's really short. And to compare it with the EPA gives you 3 years. Unlike the EPA, though, you can keep on applying for the same project or for the same sites as long as you need it and you perform what you said you do in the 2 years. So I'll explain this further for each example. For community-wide assessments, this is similar to what people call, if you're familiar with the EPA grants, these are the kind of area-wide assessment grants. So this is an area where you look at at least 4 properties in a study area, and you figure out, what would you need? Collect some environmental information, some conditions on the sites for 4 of these properties. You can do a variety of studies, planning, public engagement, outreach, for up to $300,000. And again, if you have a corridor or a neighborhood that you think you need more than 2 years, then propose what you think you can do in 2 years and then come back for more. Or maybe after 2 years, you figure out, well, I want to do site A, B, and C for site specific. Then you could go back and apply for a site specific grant. Site specific environmental investigations. Now, this is where you have one site and one site only, but and if you have a project that a site that is comprised of several parcels, then you can, depending on your situation, you can apply all sites into a site specific, or you can discuss it with our team to figure out whether you can split it up. Now, these are for all appropriate inquiry phase 1s, environmental site assessments, phase 2s, preliminary endangerment assessments, a variety of studies. You can even do pilot tests to evaluate cleanup. And this is up to $3 million. Again, this is $3 million over 2 years. So this is pretty intensive work. To compare with the EPA grants, again, EPA gives you, they used to give you about $300,000 and limit you to $200,000 a year. So these are hefty amounts for site-specific investigations. Site-specific environmental cleanup. So once you've done your phase 1s and phase 2s and perhaps your early cleanup planning, you can go to a cleanup. Now, there's a little bit of overlap between the site-specific investigation and environmental cleanup. You can do some cleanup planning under the site-specific investigation, but you can carry that over to an environmental cleanup. And it includes all the work associated with that, public meetings, when you're doing your planning out how you'll actually implement the cleanup, traffic, safety, parking, all that kind of those activities you can do under a site-specific environmental cleanup. And by the way, we do have guidelines which we will post shortly. We'll probably keep posting them because people might be joining late, but there's a lot more specifics in these guidelines on what each of these three can pay for. So the key dates. So it started Monday, and applications were being accepted on Flux, and thank you for those who helped us test out the Flux platform, and we'll see more of Flux after I present. The pre-qualifying applications are due December 7th, but this is optional. I'll explain why it's optional. After this process, after December 7th, Dtsc staff will be reviewing all the pre-qualifying applications and figure out first how much demand is there, and second, who's actually eligible. They will open up the full application in January, and that's where people can finish out their application, or people who have not participated yet can apply. And those are due on March 2022. And 1 month later, grants will be announced. So watch, and after this, there will be additional rounds of funding depending on the demand. So eligibility, what projects are eligible? Well, again, the sites must be slated for reuse. These are not for projects that just have to be cleaned up. You have to have a reuse proposed. Own and have access, and per site should be within a census tract where in Cal Elviro screen, and we'll put the link there. I think someone could put in the link for Cal Elviro screen 3. It should be 75% or more. But if your Cal Elviro screen is less than 75%, then you would still qualify if the planned use on the site is a significant benefit to the community. Significant benefit to the rural community, a tribe, or underserved populations. Now, what is a project that provides significant benefits? Well, you get to tell us that, and you get to prove it. And the scoring guidelines will tease that further out, but for the purposes of eligibility, if you say, if your community needs affordable housing, if your community needs parks or trails or jobs, then those are eligible. You'll just have to prove it. And general property eligibility. To be eligible, you can't be a property where there's an order for cleanup. And it can't be a Superfund site, or it lists here a national priority list site. Can't be a federally owned property or controlled property. It can't be under the enforcement action of a state environmental agency or a local agency. And it can't be under a RECRA, or can't have hazardous substances, hazardous processing, materials processing on it. So here's a flow chart, and this is in the guidelines. I won't go through this slide. They'll be available. They will be chatted to you. But it's a very simple process here. Stage 1 is a pre-qualifying. Again, this started, and this will end December 7th. It's open to any eligible organization. And Dtsc staff will be reviewing pre-qualifying applications to determine whether the applicant is eligible and whether the site or sites are eligible, whether they're brownfields and there's a reuse, and look at the Cal Enviro screen scores or the uses that are proposed on the site. So start early because, and while it's an easy process, we don't want to get into holidays and before you know it, it'll be too late. So please, there's a team here to help you. Start early and do it often. The full application starts after DTSC's evaluated it. It'll start in January. And this is where more data will be requested from you, more information. And this is where the scoring and the competitive portion of the process comes in. You will be scored and ranked based on the level of community participation and support and benefit, consistency with community plans, and need for brownfield renewals. So when we say community plans, that could be a regional housing needs assessment, a housing element, a parks, a sustainability plan, a climate action plan, a former redevelopment project area plan, preservation plan, a conservation plan. If you have those, gather those and start thinking about the projects that fit within these criteria. The status of the project, entitlement, and environmental clearance. So how far is the site along in the CEQA process or the project entitlement process? Do you have your permits, your land use permit, or are you just starting out? And again, this varies. The scoring criteria will be different among the three types of grants. So a community-wide assessment won't necessarily be competing with a site cleanup because the cleanup would be further along in the entitlement process. The capacity of the project partners to complete the proposed project. So this is where you all come in. All communities have different levels of capability and capacity and funding. You can have partners, and you can help show to DTSC that you can implement this, that you've been working together. And that's part of the reason why we're starting early. You have to start building those partnerships. Competitive and equitable contracting practices. So this is where DTSC would like to communities to consider all kinds of contractors or consultants who provide these services. So minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, veterans, even nonprofits can provide these services. And the more widely the applicant proposes to seek out consultants, the more competitive you will be. Clarity of the project description, budget, work plan, and schedule. Does it all match? Does it make sense? What can you do in 2 years? You don't necessarily want to go for 7 million if your cleanup only costs 300,000. So you want to make sense of your numbers. It's not like the EPA grants where everyone maxes out the maximum grant availability. In this case, your numbers have to make sense. So don't ask for 7 million if you don't need it. Commitment to submit additional project documentation as requested. So this is the case where the state wants to know, they're giving you money. They would like to know from you early and often, and maybe even after the grant is done, your successes. Because a lot of grantees, they kind of get the grant and then they leave. They don't share the good news. So we want you to share the good news on your project. And of course, leveraging other state, federal, and funding resources and technical assistance. So the more assistance you can get from elsewhere, the better. Highest ranking applications will be recommended for funding, and after which DTSC and the applicant will enter into a grant agreement. So eligibility and the 4 responsibility scenarios. So this is where we get a bit more technical. As I'd mentioned, there were some sites there that are not eligible using Superfund law or CERCLA. And these are the 4 ownership scenarios that will be considered under the grant, where the applicant is not the owner, when the applicant is a tribe and an owner, a nonprofit and an owner, and a public entity and an owner. So when the applicant is not an owner, you just have to affirm that you didn't cause any contamination on the site and didn't contribute to anything that's on the site right now. You have to describe your relationship with the owner, and you also have to describe the owner's role in the work to be performed and what they've actually done that may have caused contamination on the site. If the applicant is a tribe, now tribes are exempt from demonstrating a need for Superfund or circular responsibility, but DTSC does want to learn about the similar information as they'd asked from the previous scenario. Now, when the applicant is a nonprofit and an owner, the nonprofit must establish that they are a bona fide purchaser. They can demonstrate that by having performed due diligence before they purchased it in the customary way that you obtain these bona fide purchaser protections. And you should show that you haven't caused or contributed to any contamination on the site. And this is a case again where you might not have all the information, or you might have owned the site for a long time and it just really basically sat. If you're not sure, reach out to Dtsc. Dtsc does want to know about sites that fall through the cracks. They don't really want any cracks. They want to catch all these sites and clean them up and get them redeveloped. So please reach out to Dtsc. Now, when the applicant is a public entity and the owners, probably the most hurdles to perform. So there are several scenarios under scenario 4. First, if the public entity owned and acquired the site before January 11, 2002, and that date is when the new Brownfields law was passed under President Bush. The second scenario is if the public entity is the owner who acquired it via involuntary acquisition. So eminent domain or bankruptcy of the owner. There are other circumstances when a public agency can acquire a site. And the public entity is an owner that can establish bona fide purchaser protections and can demonstrate that they performed due diligence at the time they purchased it and did not cause any contamination. When you start filling out flux, you're going to be asked for some information. So one is that we need a site that has an assessor's parcel number or another acceptable identifier, and it must meet the definition of a brownfield site. Again, CalEnviro Screen 3.0. There is a CalEnviro Screen 4.0 now, but for now we are using CalEnviro Screen 3.0. So when you go into CalEnviro Screen, make sure you go to 3.0. Also, tribes don't really need to meet the CalEnviro Screen as long as it benefits a tribe. It is eligible. And again, if it's below 75%, it should be a beneficial use. Now, what kind of costs are covered? So these are generally covered costs. So under all the 3 grants, these are eligible. Again, must be spent within 2 years. And you can reapply if you need more money. These are reimbursements. And the implementation would be subject to the work plan that you work out with Dtsc. It's for conducting due diligence under a community-wide assessment, community engagement. There will be some project management costs allowed, and also regulatory oversight costs. And it doesn't have to be Dtsc. It can be the water board or a local agency. And you can even establish a website with it. Now for community-wide assessments, again, the general covered costs plus you can do a brownfields inventory, you can do GIS mapping, you can do your AAI phase 1s, PEAs, and phase 2s. For site-specific, similarly, you can do some of the costs covered under a community-wide assessment, but you dig deeper now because you're working toward cleanup. The site probably does need assessment and maybe will need cleanup. And you can actually include public engagement needed for CEQA activities related with the cleanup work. For cleanup, you can actually do pilot tests to design a cleanup, removal action work plans, remedial plans. O&M, this is something you want to run by Dtsc because it won't cover long-term O&M. It will also include insurance. Type of activities the grant will not cover. Well, not for preparing the grant and for executing the grant. No long-term O&M or maintenance of a remedy approved. Cost of compliance and monitoring with the land use covenant for penalty. And one thing that is different from this and the EPA is that you cannot ask for cleanup of PCBs, lead, and asbestos in buildings. So if you're looking to do this kind of activity, apply for the EPA grant, which, by the way, are due December 1st. No building demolition unless you require buildings in a way of a cleanup. and won't cover abandoning oil wells or mine features. There are grants under different other agencies for that. And no food and childcare during public meetings. So if you think you're ready, you should start your application. And that's where Natasha is now going to show you what Flux looks like. So Natasha, you can take it on from here.
Great, thanks, Ignacio. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natasha DiPietro, and I'll be walking through the Flux platform.
So this is the DTSC application portal landing page. The first step to accessing our application portal is creating an account. You can do that by clicking this button here. You'll then be asked to provide basic information about yourself and your organization. One thing that's important to note is that you should make sure the email address is spelled correctly, because that'll be the easiest way for us to contact you. Another important thing to note is that if multiple users are going to contribute to an application, a representative of the eligible entity should register first, and then additional users can be added to the application in the platform, and I'll show you guys how to do that later. So once you've entered this information and you submit your request, we will accept your registration and you'll receive an email with a link to set up your password. Make sure you check your spam folder because sometimes it will end up there. So the next step is going to be to sign into the portal. When you sign into the portal, this is the landing page that you'll see within it. This first page shows you information about things that you can do on the portal. It helps you navigate through the application process. So you'll notice that there's a menu bar on the left here, and this is the easiest way to navigate between the pages. So I'll take you through the steps of submitting an application now. So the first step is to navigate to the Submit an Application page here. And then you can see right now we have two active programs, Request for Voluntary Oversight and also the Ecrg. So you'll click on this button and a new application will open. The first thing I want to point out to you is that you'll see an overview of the program with links that will bring you to our website, as well as some portal instructions that I encourage you to read. The most important thing to know is that when you're working in the portal does not automatically save your work. So you should save and continue often in order to save your work. Section 1 of the application asks about eligibility. So the first question is, what type of entity are you? And within Flux, there's conditional logic that's built in. So if you answer a question a certain way, other questions may pop up. For example, if you're a nonprofit, we'd like to see proof of that status. So this box will allow you to upload proof of that. And the second half is some of those conditions that Ignacio talked about that would make your site ineligible. So read through these. And if none of them apply, or if you're submitting a community-wide assessment, then you'll click this last option and you'll push Save and Continue to let the system know that you should be allowed to see the rest of the application. Section 2 is application contacts. And this is where a grantee organization may permit access to the application for additional users. Note that it's important that the eligible entity is showing here, and that's why it's important for the eligible entity to register first and to start the application, because Flux will automatically populate this, and this needs to be the entity that will receive the funding. In order to add an additional contact that can edit and contribute to the application, you should locate the appropriate contact type, and you can click Add New here. An environmental consultant, for example, a development partner can be kind of a catch-all, so if nothing really applies, you can use this one. But what you'll do is click Add New, and you will enter your contact's information. So what's required is the first name, last name, and an email address. And I'd like to caution you to be very careful when you enter this as well, because you do not have access to edit this once you save it for security reasons. If a mistake is made, you can contact us and we can help you fix that. When you do that, you should hit save, and then Flex will register the additional user for you. And at that point, you can instruct your contact to go back to our landing page where they can reset or create a new password. Once they've done that, they'll receive an email with a link and they should be able to access the portal. So section 3 is about application type, and Ignacio spoke at length about the types of applications that are accepted. One thing I'd like to point out is that if you are submitting an environmental cleanup application, that an approved cleanup plan is required, and we would ask you to upload that as well. So I'm going to save and continue as a best practice. Section 4 is asking for details of your site information, the Cal EnviroScreen score, previous and planned site use, and also site photos. So depending on the type of application that you're submitting, you may need to enter more than one record here. But in this case, we'll just enter one for environmental cleanup. So the way to do that is to click on this blue button here, and a new window will open. So then you'll answer all the questions in here: site name, site address, latitude, longitude. And one thing that's important to note in Flex is required fields are bolded. So you'll be able to tell generally which fields are required, and you'll also need to enter all of those details before you're able to submit an application. Some pieces of information that we're asking for, like Assembly District or Senate District, can be found on a web application that Dtsc has put together. So you can click on this link and it will take you to this web application where you can either mouse around to find a given site, or you can type in an address. And you'll see that the Assembly District is listed here, the Senate District is listed here, and the Cal EnviroScreen score is also listed here. So those pieces of information will need to be input within this window here. The next thing I want to show you is how to upload a document. You can see in general, when we're asking you to upload a document or photos, we've included this green background so it's easy to identify. You'll click on this blue button, Add Files, and then you'll upload it this way. So it says Upload Complete. You can close out of this. And once you've done that, the option to add it here will disappear. So you can see that you've met that requirement. There are ways to edit it or change it or add additional documents that I'll show you later on. So go through, and then additional documents we're asking for in this are for site photos here, and it's a similar method of uploading that I just showed you. So I'll just add a name and I'll save it. So now I'd like to show you how to move in and out of an application. We've gotten as far as section 4, and what I'm going to do, instead of saving and continuing, I'm going to save and close. And that will take us out of edit mode for the application and put it into detail mode. So you can still see the details of your application, but you can't edit them until you click edit again. So in general, on this menu, this navigation pane here, you can see that your applications, or as they're called, requests in this system, will be shown here. So pending requests are requests or applications that you've started but have not submitted. Any submitted applications that you provide will go into this box here. And if Dtsc reviews your application and needs more information about something specific, the application will show up in this request to edit box here. So as you can see, the application that we just started is visible here, but I can't edit it. The way to be able to do that is to click this edit button up at the top right corner. But I also want to show you, before we go back into this application, the site box here. So each record that you create for sites and also for grantee budgets, create their own records that you can edit outside of the application here. So you can see that because we've started the record inside the application, you can now edit them here as well. So I'll go back to the application we started. Additionally, I want to point out that if you have multiple applications, you can access them all here. Section 5 and 6 are pretty straightforward drop-down boxes and text areas for you to answer the questions. And I'll move to Section 7. So Section 7 is the preliminary budget details. So we're asking for you to provide an estimated cost for each proposed task of work. And this section functions similarly to the site record, where you'll push this blue plus sign here, and it will create a record for each task that you have identified. So phase 2, for example, and you'll put the associated estimated cost for contracts, project management, and other allocations, and then you'll save. Once you save, you'll see that you have the option to edit the record by using this blue button here. You can also delete the record, or you can add an additional task. So you'll be able to see the total amount that you've asked for here, as well as the breakdown of each task in the snapshot right here. One thing I'd like to point out is there's an Excel function that will only export the records that you've entered using the blue button. You can't edit the records themselves in Excel. You have to do that within Flux. So again, I'm going to save and continue as a best practice. Okay, Section 8 is pertaining to regulatory oversight, and if you have any existing regulatory oversight, which is not necessary to apply, but eventually is required for environmental investigation or cleanup applications. If you're submitting a community-wide assessment, you would choose not applicable from this drop-down menu. But if your site currently is under regulatory oversight, this is another document we'd like for you to upload with your application. Section 9 is related to site ownership and circular liability. Note that, as Ignacio said, ownership is not required. If you do not have ownership, then you need to either provide an access agreement or describe how you do have access. So for example, if you have an access agreement and you say yes, that's another document we'd like to see with your application. Section 10 is like a document repository. So any documents that you've uploaded will go into Section 10, with the exception of Section 4, because this is its own record. So that'll be kept in here. And if you have to edit it, you've got to go back in either this way or on the navigation pane that I showed you earlier. But in general, any documents that are uploaded would be shown here. You can also manually upload documents here the same way. If you do it this way, then you have the option to tell us what type of document it is that you're adding here. So a cleanup report, all these examples. Section 11 is related to additional information. So anything you'd like to tell us that wasn't covered in the application, and also how you heard about the ECRG program. Section 12 states some terms of the application is where you will provide a signature, but this happens after the submittal has occurred. So the signature will be collected through DocuSign, but will be initiated by Dtsc. So please reach out to us if you haven't received a prompt to sign using DocuSign within 2 business days of submitting an application. Once you have finished entering all the information on your application, what you'll do is you'll say save and close in order to exit out of edit mode. Now you can see the application in detail mode, and you can review your answers. If you need to make changes to any of these answers, again, you can click the edit button. You can always go back in and edit the record until you've submitted. So once you click submit, it's giving you a warning to say that you'd like to confirm to proceed, and I'll caution you that once you submit the application, you can't make edits to it. So please review your information carefully before you submit it.
So I think that concludes this brief overview of Flex.
Okay, and so now we can go on to a question and answer section.
Thank you so much, Devin. I'm going to go ahead and take over for the Q&A portion of this session. I just want to say thank you to Natasha and Ignacio for presenting this really important information and doing such a great job at it. And also to you, Devin, for managing the poll. So we are ready to take questions. I've already started answering some questions that I was seeing in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and read out some of the questions that I wasn't able to get to. And if there are additional questions, you are welcome to go ahead and use the chat, and I will try my best to get to all of them. I did want to say, though, that as we may run out of time today, we are going to have more opportunities. We have another webinar, a little bit different than today's, more focused on people who are helping develop applications, but we have that tomorrow. There's space open there. And then we are going to be scheduling additional information. There's going to be opportunities to sign up through CCLR to speak with them for one-on-one sessions as well. And our email addresses are open and available to take questions on an ongoing basis. I just did want to go ahead and share that with everyone. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of these questions. The first question I see is, can we get a copy of the presentation? Yes, a presentation copy will be available in the next couple of days. The questioner also asked for some more details and community assessment eligible activities. You can find that information in our guidelines. We've tried to lay it out in as much detail as possible. I see another question. Can funds be used for building demolition and soil remediation? That's something that we're going to decide on a case-by-case basis. The way we look at it right now, we should be able to allow for building demolition if it's needed to access for the cleanup. So of course, we do have to make some case-by-case determinations because, as you know, building demolition can be very expensive. So that's why we'll need to understand the site circumstances before we make a decision on that. I see a question here about the interplay between EPA Brownfield grant process and the Ecrg program. They are two separate grants. Obviously, ours is a little bit different. Ours is more California focused. We have more money available to California sites as opposed to US EPA, whose program is much broader and is trying to fulfill some national needs. Our application process is different. We've tried to make ours available online, a little bit less narrative. And in a broader sense, we want to be careful about our grantees not using funds for the same activities. So in the application, we do ask for what other fundings are being pursued for the work that you're asking for in the Ecrg. And those are questions that we're going to sort of, I think, iron out a little bit as we get further into our process. And I'm seeing some more questions popping up. There's a question about, is the direct cost of installing a vapor intrusion mitigation system under a new construction apartment building an eligible expense? And the answer is yes, it is. That is considered to be an eligible expense as long as a regulatory agency has asked for it and there's a cleanup plan in place. That is definitely something that we would fund. Another question is, are two different entities able to apply for the grant for the same site? No, I don't think so. I don't think that will increase the chances. I think that go ahead and write in one good, strong application for a single site. I don't think we'll entertain two separate applications for the same site. Oh, I see a question here that just popped up. One of the criteria state that DTSC will also accept applications outside of the Callan-Bar screen score of 75% plus. if the proposed reuse provides a significant community benefit. So I think the question is that would assessment or cleanup of an existing park and school be eligible, or it does need to be a reuse? I think that's very site specific. We'll want to understand that a little bit better before I answer that question, because we definitely are looking for a newer and higher, better use. But I think I might need to understand that specific question a little bit more, and this would be a good kind of question to set up a one-on-one session on, so we can speak about it in a little bit more detail. I see another question that's also just popped up. Can you clarify what the definition of a site is in the context of addressing groundwater contamination that's resulting from several sources? Can the site be a larger area that requires remediation, where some individual sites may be under an order and some may not be? So we're staying away from sites that are complex groundwater studies, because even though it looks like we have a lot of money, we have a lot of projects that we'd like to do, and groundwater studies in and of itself can be really expensive. We are looking more to your more typical brownfield sites, where conducting a cleanup will make the site safe for reuse. Also, we will not be sites that have existing orders on them are not eligible to apply for ECRG funding. I see a question about, I'm working on an affordable housing project with significant community benefit located in a neighborhood with a low CES score. This sort of project, so when you are outside of that high CES score, but you are providing a use for a vulnerable population, and affordable housing is a great need. That is something that is eligible. It's all a matter of scoring, but it definitely meets the eligibility criteria. Who should apply for the grant, a city or the potential owner developer who is a nonprofit? I don't think it matters. When you have project partners who are all involved and engaged in trying to make a project happen, there isn't, whoever wants to apply can apply. I don't think we have a preference. I will put a plug in for tribes, for tribal projects, if the applicant is a tribe, because we are trying to really make sure that we provide good service to our tribal partners. Tribal applications will get a scoring boost when we get to that point. We're not quite there right now because we're in the pre-qualifying mode, but I did want to point that out. I see a question, can you define a brownfield site? There's 2,000 plus acres of native tribal land that was burned and needs all kinds of work, future fire prevention. Our projects are more related to sort of reuse and redevelopment. So within the 2,000 acres, if there are areas that are slated for reuse and redevelopment, that's the kind of thing that we really want to see in the ECRG process. We don't necessarily do cleanups that are not resulting in some kind of buildup, but we definitely would like to talk to you in a little bit more detail from a tribal perspective, and really understand what tribal needs are. So if there are some special considerations that we need to incorporate, we would love to do that. So we'd like to hear your feedback there. I have a question about, we currently own an underutilized property that currently a church leases. The question is about developing multiple units, and you need help with vetting and the entitlement process to explore the opportunity. So I'm not sure exactly what that means. Entitlement gets a little bit more into the construction side of things, so we'd have to understand what that really means. What I can say is that if you're interested in purchasing the property for your reuse, whether it's homes or condos, we can consider perhaps helping you out with your due diligence documentation. That is, of course, if all of the other eligibility criteria is met. Let's see. If the applicant does not have an approved cleanup plan by the time the pre-qualifying application is due, can they submit an application for a site-specific cleanup with a draft cleanup plan? Yes, we've got some flexibility on where the investigation grants end and the cleanup plans, cleanup grants begin. You can take a look at we've got a little matrix up on our guidelines. And so you can see that there is flexibility there. So if you're unsure, give us a call, we could talk you through it. But late stage investigations can either come in under an investigation or they could come in under cleanup as well. And because we're very new and figuring out a lot of what we're looking for as well, don't worry about applying for the wrong type of grant. If it's a good project, if we need to make some changes on our end, we can go ahead and do that. I see a question that VIMs are eligible. And the question, follow-up to that is, are methane or radon mitigation systems eligible as well? So regulatory agencies, us and the Water Board, we don't do methane mitigation systems. Those are normally a local public works thing. So if that's part of a larger volatile organic compound situation, which is something that we do regulate, then we would. In and of itself, I do not think so. I'm scrolling through questions to see if there are questions that I've missed.
There's a question. There's a question
sorry,
here. Yeah, there's a question here, Miriam. If the applicant does not have an approved cleanup plan by the time the pre-qualifying application is due in December 7th, can we still submit an application for a site-specific cleanup with a draft cleanup plan or an approved site investigation report?
Yeah, Ignacio, I think I just answered that question. I think that there's flexibility. They should be able to apply, and we can switch out the boxes depending on what information is there. So I think I answered that question. I have a question. What if we are not a nonprofit company, but purchased land to build homes, including low-income homes? No, only nonprofits, public entities, and tribes are eligible to apply for our funding. And there's always opportunities for partnership if one of the project partners happens to be an eligible entity.
Miriam, I see two or three more. I'm just going to read them out. Okay. Is cleanup of hazardous building materials eligible?
No, not in and of itself, it is not.
And I have a site specific that was used as a shooting range. Through the years, the bullet shells have created an environmental issue. The cleanup of the site, would it be eligible for grant funding?
Yes, there's always going to be other considerations, but generally, yes, shooting ranges are something that we regulate, and we would be able to fund that, yes.
If a nonprofit is not the owner of the site, will a right to enter agreement suffice as access to the site, or must they have an executed lease?
No, that's a really good question, Jean. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. We want to make sure that there is some agreement in place to allow you to access the site and do the work that is being proposed. It doesn't have to be any one thing or the other in particular, but whatever it is going to be uploaded to Flux as part of your responses, and it's something that we'll take a look at. But yeah, we're open because we understand that there's more than one ways to access a site and allow for the environmental work to continue.
And is the intention of reuse, such as a park, acceptable even if there isn't yet a design or funding to build the park?
So this is where we kind of move from, are you qualified? Do you meet the qualifying criteria to apply, versus how much, how competitive are you when we start the scoring process? So when the scoring portion of the application is released, you'll see that we ask a lot of questions that have to do with the planning and the stages of planning and the funding for the eventual reuse. So I think that this is something where you'll qualify, but depending on the number of applications we get, I don't know if that would be a very sort of high scoring application, but of course, that's just one piece among others. So just something to keep in mind.
Okay, can an approved interim remedial plan, action plan, IRAP, be considered as an approved cleanup plan?
Yes, and I don't see why not. If it's an approved plan and it's not, it's a current plan and a regulatory agency has approved it, then yes, it should be fine. And I see another question that's just popped up. Can we apply for a grant to clean up a site that soil was encapsulated under an arterial street? Do you recommend it? It really sort of, I think there's more, we need a greater level of understanding of that particular situation. This is another opportunity to maybe sign up for a one-on-one session, but I can't make any recommendations. I don't know anything about the site, but yes, if a regulatory agency has determined that that soil that was encapsulated needs to be removed in order to support the site's reuse, then yes, that is something that we can, that we should be able to cover. I see some other questions have popped in. We see one that says, will funds be allocated into various categories? I'm not sure I understand that question. I think if you mean if we have specific allocations for assessment grants, cleanup grants, or investigation grants, at this time we don't. We are very early stages in our program development, and we're gonna basically see how things go in the pre-qualifying application, what kind of data we get in before we make those decisions.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, hi. So I'm the one who asked that question. So I was trying to get a sense if like the community-wide assessment portion of the grant will 10% of the overall 200 million be allocated toward that, or 20 in site-specific, or what was the other category? Cleanup.
Correct. No,
Yes.
at this time, we don't have any specific allocations. We just want to be able to look at what we get in each application round and make decisions accordingly. Another question that I see here is, if the applicant is already a recipient of a DTSC grant, are they still able to apply for the Ecrg? Yes, absolutely. There's no reason why, if you already have money and you need additional funding to complete the cleanup or the investigation, then there's no reason why you cannot apply for the Ecrg. Another question I see here is, please consider green remediation technologies that can be integrated with reuse projects. We are definitely open to all types of technologies. What we're asking for is that the cleanup plans be approved by a regulatory agency. And if you've worked with your regulator and decided that a specific type of green remediation technology works best for the cleanup for that site, then that's something that we should be able to fund under the Ecrg.
There are two new questions. It says, is this a limited submission opportunity?
The answer to that question is that there is a timeline right now. We'll close out the pre-qualifying applications in the first week of December, and then we'll launch the full application in January. After that, there definitely will be other opportunities, because we'll get $100 million of funding made available to us July of 2022 and then July of 2023. So there will be additional rounds of applications. Exactly whether we'll do an annual notice of availability of funds, or whether we'll do it biannually, or maybe more than that, we haven't quite figured that out. Those are some decisions that we're still chewing on right now, and our website and CCLR's information will be updated as we get a little bit more into those details.
There's two last questions, and I'll answer. The first one is the slide deck to be available? And as I mentioned, both the recording, the slide deck will be available along with other resources. As I mentioned, the slide deck comes primarily from the guidelines, and that has been chatted, and that is a great resource for you. And last question for Miriam is, does the ABCA count as a cleanup plan? For example, folks that participate in many EPA programs do have ABCAs.
Yes, I think that's where we're going to have to work out a little bit of a transition, because some of the EPA funded projects may or may not have a state regulatory agency involved. And so if they do, then yes, if a state agency or a CUPA, a local agency, has approved that cleanup plan, then that's something that we will definitely implement. If they worked outside of state regulatory oversight, then they'll need to get engaged with a regulatory agency, and there may be some changes or updates that have to be done to the plan. That happens anytime a new regulator gets involved, and that is something that the ECRG will be able to pay for. Was there anything else? Any other questions, Jean, that I missed?
Go ahead, Richard. Maybe you can unmute. Can we unmute Richard? Because I think he wasn't able to finish his question.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm using my phone and I accidentally hit the send button as I was typing. My question was, during the review process, I guess there's going to be a point system that is given to the different applications. And I was looking, as I was looking at the criteria, it said how far or how much progress you've made on your environmental reviews. And I was wondering, how do you reconcile getting into environmental reviews when that is what the purpose of this funding is for? I'm not sure if that makes sense, but
No, I understand. And I think, part of what we're doing is that we're picking up projects in various stages. So super early stage, which I would consider the community-wide assessments, where they're both early in the planning perspective and in the environmental review perspective. And then there's environmental investigations that are needed in order to kind of make those decisions. And then there are the later stage projects which are already engaged with cleanup. So we're asking those questions because we want to know, but we understand that each type of grant is going to have sort of a different type of answer. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't get funded. We're not going to be funding only cleanup projects. We do know that investigation and super early stage investigation is needed in our state to kind of propel a lot of these properties, and that's something we recognize. Because it's something we're building, I can't say anything more specifically than that, and that's once again why we're highly encouraging everyone to participate in the pre-qualifying application process, because we want to be able to fine-tune our scoring based on based on the interest in our program. And I just can't emphasize that enough. But generally, I recognize your question, Richard, and it right now it's just a matter of we're asking that question. It's not, you have to be penalized for being early stage. Jean, how are we doing with time?
I think we can definitely commit to review all of the questions, and if there are other outstanding questions, we can get back to the individual who asked them or put them into the FAQ document in the guidelines. Please note that we'll continue to schedule other webinars and are available for the slots in the Sign Up Genius. If those are all full, we'll add additional slots. And you do have our contact information as well as DTSC's contact information. There are, as you saw, a fairly large dedicated team. Our success is your success, and so we're here to support you. So we are thrilled that we got as many questions, and people really were very responsive, and to have so many people on this first launch, we're very excited and look forward to having continued conversations and be here for your support.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jean, and thanks to everybody for participating and all these great questions. And we look forward to seeing your applications in the Flux system, seeing you at our future webinars, and hopefully through the Sign Up Genius in our one-on-one sessions as well.